I couldn't breathe, not because of another episode. I know what those feel like, the tightening in my chest, the sound of my own pulse arriving before the fear does, my vision narrowing at the edges like the world is closing a door on me from somewhere outside my control. I've had years to learn the architecture of my own panic. This wasn't that. This was different. This was standing in my own backyard at 6:15 in the evening, calling a name into a silence that didn't answer, and understanding, cell by cell, that the one thing trained to catch me before I fell was the thing that had disappeared. His leash was still hanging on the hook by the back door. His water bowl was still full. The gate to the yard was latched the way it always was, the way I checked it myself out of habit every single morning. Atlas was gone. My mother-in-law found me standing there, and she wrapped her arms around me before I'd even managed to say his name out loud a second time. She cried harder than I did. I remember that specifically, because at the time it felt like a kindness, a woman so moved by my loss that her own grief overtook mine. She held onto me in the doorway and said we'd find him together, she promised. And by 9 that night she'd printed 200 flyers on the home office printer and organized a phone tree with 3 of our neighbors. By the next morning, half the block had his photo taped to their mailboxes. A local Facebook group with 4,000 members had picked up the post and shared it further than I could track. People I'd never met commented that they were praying for us. Someone brought over a casserole, the way people do when they don't know what else to offer. Everyone called Linda an angel. I did too, for almost 2 days. Then, on the second evening, my phone vibrated, not with a call, not with another comment on the missing dog post, but with a location alert from the app tied to Atlas's emergency tracking harness, the one built into his service vest that I'd never once needed before that week. The pin dropped on a property 40 minutes outside the city, a commercial breeding kennel, one that, I would learn within the hour, local police had already been watching for months. 48 hours after Atlas disappeared, a patrol car pulled up in front of Linda's house. This time, the officers weren't there to help search for a missing dog. They were there because they already knew exactly who'd sold him. I need to go back. Not because the beginning makes any of this easier to hear, but because you can't understand how thoroughly my own family planned this without understanding what Atlas actually was to me, and what it cost them every single day to watch him do something they never could. I was a paramedic for 6 years. I want to start there because most people who meet me now, calm, organized, the kind of person who color codes a project spreadsheet for fun, have no idea that version of me ever existed. I love that job with a specificity that's hard to explain to people who have never done it. The particular clarity of an emergency. The way your training takes over and your hands know what to do before your mind fully catches up. I was good at it. I believed for a long time that I'd do it until I retire. 6 years in, on a call that started out routine, a domestic disturbance, backup requested, nothing in the dispatch notes that suggested anything beyond the ordinary chaos of that kind of call. A man I was trying to help pulled a knife on me in the doorway of his own apartment. I don't talk about the specifics much even now. I'll say this: I survived. My partner got me out. The man was arrested. I spent 4 days in the hospital and the better part of the following year in and out of surgeries that fixed what could be fixed on the outside. What couldn't be fixed as easily was everything underneath. I left EMS 8 months after the attack. I couldn't get back into an ambulance without my hands shaking so badly I couldn't check a pulse. I couldn't hear certain radio tones without my whole body reacting like the emergency was happening again. Right then, years later, in a kitchen or a grocery store or my own living room. I was diagnosed with severe PTSD by a psychiatrist who used words like hypervigilance and intrusive recall that I understood clinically from my own training, and still couldn't apply to myself without feeling like I was describing a stranger. I retrained as a UX designer, quieter work I could do from home on the days my body wouldn't cooperate with the outside world. I built a smaller life, a safer one. I told myself that was enough. It wasn't, not entirely, until Atlas. I met him at 11 months old at a training facility 2 hours from where I lived. On a gray November morning I still remember in more detail than most weeks of my life since. He was a golden retriever, already enormous for his age, with a calm that seemed almost engineered, which, in a sense, it was. He'd spent nearly a year in a specialized program training PTSD service dogs for veterans and first responders, learning tasks that still, sometimes, strike me as closer to miracle than mechanism. Interrupting a panic attack before it fully arrives, waking me from a nightmare with a specific, deliberate paw on the chest, creating physical distance between me and a crowd that's starting to close in, reminding me, with a nudge and a particular look, when it was time for medication I'd otherwise forget in the fog of a bad day. The trainer walked me through his certifications, his training history, 18 months of documentation that had gone into making him exactly what I needed. She told me near the end something I've held onto since. A dog like this isn't a pet. He's medical equipment with a heartbeat. Treat the bond that way and he'll give you your life back. He gave me my life back within the first month. The first time he stopped a full panic attack. We were in a grocery store, an ordinary Tuesday, fluorescent lights, the particular hum of a freezer aisle. Nothing about the moment that should have triggered anything. But something did, some combination of noise and proximity, and a stranger moving too quickly toward me from an angle I hadn't tracked. And I felt the floor start to tilt the way it always did right before everything narrowed to a single point of fear. Atlas was against my legs before I'd even consciously registered what was happening. Firm, deliberate pressure, his whole solid weight leaning into me, grounding me the way his training had taught him to. He looked up at me and held that look, patient, unhurried, until my breathing found its way back to something like normal. I stood in that freezer aisle with my hand buried in his fur, and I cried quietly from relief rather than fear, for the first time in longer than I could remember. That became our pattern. Small emergencies caught before they became large ones. Nightmares interrupted with a paw on my chest at 3 in the morning, pulling me up out of a dream before it could fully take hold. Crowded restaurants made survivable because he'd position himself, unprompted, between me and whatever was making the room feel too small. A specific bark, low and patient, when I'd forgotten to take my evening medication, which happened more often than I like to admit. He gave me back things I'd assumed were permanently gone. Grocery stores, restaurants, the ability to sit in a waiting room without my whole body treating it like a threat. My husband, Daniel, understood what Atlas meant to me mostly. He'd watched me before Atlas and after, and the difference wasn't subtle enough to argue with. His family understood it differently. The comments started small, the way most resentments do, offhand, delivered with a laugh that was supposed to soften them. Easy to brush off individually and much harder to brush off once you notice the pattern. "Must be nice," my mother-in-law Linda said once, watching me feed Atlas his specially formulated food. "Having a dog that eats better than half this family." I laughed it off. I told myself she didn't mean anything by it. It kept happening. At Thanksgiving, Linda brought up, unprompted, that she'd looked up how much a trained service dog typically cost. $15,000, $20,000 some of these dogs, she said, to the table generally, in the tone of someone sharing an interesting fact rather than building towards something. "That's more than Daniel's first car, more than most people's cars, period." "He's not a car, Linda," I said. "He's the reason I can sit at this table." She smiled at that, a small, tight smile I didn't know yet how to read. "Of course, sweetheart. I just think it's remarkable is all." My sister-in-law, Rachel, was worse, in a way that was somehow both more direct and easier to dismiss at the time. She'd gone through a divorce 2 years earlier that left her with debt she talked about constantly, in the specific, circling way people talk about things they haven't figured out how to fix. She'd make comments about Atlas that had an edge under the joke. "You know what I could do with what that dog's worth," she said once, watching him settle at my feet during a family dinner, perfectly still, perfectly attentive, doing exactly what he'd been trained to do. "Imagine what someone would pay for a dog like that, fully trained, papers and everything." "He's not for sale, Rachel," I said, and I remember laughing when I said it, because at the time it felt like an obviously absurd thing to even have to say out loud. I didn't know yet that I was wrong about that. I didn't know that somewhere in the months that followed, "imagine what someone would pay" stopped being a passing comment and started being a question somebody actually went looking for the answer to. Daniel would apologize for his family after these dinners in the car on the drive home the same way every time. "They don't get it," he'd say. "They've never had to live with something like what you live with. I'll talk to them." He never did, not really. A soft word here, a redirected conversation there, never anything that actually landed, never anything that made the comments stop. I told myself it was fine. I told myself families were complicated and Daniel was doing his best, and the comments, ugly as they were still just comments. I had no reason then to think they were anything more. The last comment came about 6 weeks before Atlas disappeared, at a birthday dinner for Daniel's father. Linda had been drinking a little more than usual. Loose in a way, she rarely let herself be in front of company, and at some point during dessert she looked across the table at me and said, not unkindly, almost thoughtfully, "You know, I sometimes wonder if you love that dog more than you love this family." The table went quiet. "That's not fair," Daniel said, finally weakly into the silence. "I'm not trying to be unfair," Linda said. "I'm just saying, Emily, sweetheart, you spend more time worrying about him than about anything else in this family. More money on him than most people spend raising an actual child. I just think about that sometimes, what that says." I remember exactly what I said back, because I've replayed it so many times since. "He didn't just cost money, Linda. He gave me back my life. I don't expect you to understand what that's worth, because you've never had to lose the ability to sit in a room without feeling like you're about to die. I hope you never do." She didn't say anything else that night. She just looked at me for a long moment with an expression I couldn't fully place at the time, something calculating underneath the hurt she was performing, though I didn't let myself see it as calculating until much later, until I had reason to look back at that exact moment and understand it differently. I thought it was the end of an ugly conversation. It was, I would learn, closer to beginning. The morning it happened was ordinary in every way that made it worse. Daniel had left early for a work trip 2 nights, a conference 3 states away, nothing unusual. I'd gone into the office for a rare in-person meeting, something I did maybe once a month, leaving Atlas at home in the yard with fresh water and the gate latched the way it always was. Linda had a key to our house. She'd had one for years, an arrangement from before I'd fully understood the shape of her involvement in our lives, something that had never bothered me until it very suddenly did. She'd mentioned, the day before, that she might stop by to drop off some things Daniel had left at her house the previous weekend. I got home a little after 6. The house was quiet in the specific way that meant something was wrong before I could articulate what. I called his name from the kitchen. Nothing. I went out to the yard. Empty. The gate latched undisturbed exactly the way I'd left it that morning. I called his name again, walking the length of the yard, checking the side gate, checking under the deck where he sometimes went to escape the afternoon heat, my voice climbing towards something I didn't want to name yet. That's when Linda found me. She must have still had her key, must have let herself in sometime after I'd left for work, though at the time none of that registered as strange. She came around the side of the house with an expression of such immediate, overwhelming distress that I didn't think to question anything about her timing at all. "Oh my God," she said, already crying, already reaching for me. "Emily, oh my God, what happened? Where is he?" I stood in my own backyard, calling for a dog who wasn't going to answer, while the woman who'd let herself into my house that afternoon held me and told me, through tears that looked, in every way I could measure at the time, completely real, that we were going to find him. I believed her. For almost 2 days, I believed every single thing she told me. The location alert came through at 8:52 on the second evening, while I was sitting on the living room floor surrounded by 200 flyers I'd helped Linda print, my back against the couch, too exhausted to cry anymore and too wired to sleep. I stared at the notification for several seconds before I understood what I was looking at. Atlas location update. I hadn't even remembered the tracking harness had a signal function beyond the basic GPS chip. It had come bundled with his certification equipment from the training organization, something I'd set up once, months earlier, and mostly forgotten about because I'd never needed it. It pinged intermittently, the trainer had explained, whenever it came within range of a compatible receiver network, which meant it hadn't been transmitting because Atlas had been somewhere entirely outside that network. Now it was transmitting from a fixed address 40 minutes outside the city. I called the number for Meridian Service Partners, the organization that had trained him, with hands that wouldn't quite stop shaking. The woman who answered, Officer Reyes, I'd learn later, was actually a detective who liaised directly with the organization on exactly this kind of case. Didn't sound surprised. That, more than anything else that night, told me something was badly wrong. Ma'am, I need you to stay calm and listen carefully, she said. That address is a property we've had under surveillance for approximately 4 months. We believe it's operating as an unlicensed breeding and resale facility, and we have reason to believe it's been used to process stolen and illegally acquired service and working dogs before they're transported out of state. I need to ask you something important. Has anyone close to you had access to your dog in the last 48 hours? I sat very still on my living room floor. My mother-in-law, I said, she has a key to my house. There was a pause on the other end of the line that told me everything before she said another word. We're going to need to talk to you in person, Detective Reyes said. Tonight, if you're able. I didn't tell Linda where I was going. That, more than almost anything else in this story, is the moment I think about when people ask me how I finally started seeing clearly. I'd spent 2 days accepting comfort from a woman who cried harder than I did over a loss she'd apparently arranged herself. And something in me, some instinct built from years of paying close attention to danger, the same instinct that had once made me good at my old job, told me, before I had a single piece of hard evidence, not to say a word. I told Daniel I was following up a lead with the police. That was true, technically, in the narrowest possible sense. Detective Reyes met me at a substation on the edge of the city, in a small office that smelled like old coffee and printer toner. And she laid out, with the same careful, unhurried clarity I imagine she used with every family who walked through that door, not yet understanding what they were about to learn. Trained service animals are a growing target for organized resale networks, she said. A dog like yours, fully certified, extensively trained, documented medical history, can sell for $15,000 to $25,000 on the right buyer network, sometimes more. We've been building a case against this particular kennel for months. What we didn't expect was for a service dog with an active tracking harness to walk directly into it. You think someone sold him, I said. My voice came out flatter than I expected. The particular flatness of a body that has decided on its own to hold off on feeling something until it's safer to feel it. I think the evidence is going to tell us that soon, she said. I'd like your permission to recover him tonight, and I'd like to ask you not to alert anyone in your family that we're doing this. If someone close to you is involved, the worst thing we could do right now is let them know we're already looking. I signed whatever needed signing. I sat in the passenger seat of an unmarked car for the drive out to that property, and I don't remember most of that drive except the specific silence of it, the streetlights sliding past in a rhythm I couldn't focus on. They found him in a holding building at the back of the property. 20-some dogs in kennels of varying quality, most of them clearly bred and raised there for sale, and one golden retriever in a blue service vest that had no business being in that building at all. He recognized me before I'd made it halfway across the room. His whole body changed, the stiff, watchful posture he'd apparently held for 2 days breaking apart into something frantic and relieved, straining against the kennel door, making a sound I'd never heard him make before, something between a bark and a cry. I got down on the concrete floor and put my arms around him, and he pressed his whole weight into me the way he did during an episode. Except this time I understood, somewhere underneath my own relief, that he was the one who needed grounding. He was thinner than I'd left him. There was a raw patch on one paw pad, and he flinched briefly when an unfamiliar officer reached toward his harness to check the tracking unit. It took him a long time that night to stop shaking, even in the car, even with my hand buried in his fur the whole ride home. Detective Reyes recovered him under an active investigative hold rather than releasing him back to me immediately. A detail that frustrated me in the moment and that I understood later as the exact kind of careful procedural patience that eventually built an unbreakable case. He was examined by a vet, his microchip and certification cross-checked against the training organization's registry, every detail documented before he came home with me 2 days later, once the initial evidence gathering was complete. We recovered him before he could be transported further, Reyes told me that first night, standing beside the car while Atlas lay curled against my legs in the back seat. Whoever arranged this sale, they moved him through a broker who's already known to us. We have security footage from this property going back weeks. I want you to prepare yourself, Mrs. Carter. Whatever we find in that footage, it's not going to be a stranger. It wasn't. 3 days later, Reyes called me back into that same small office and played me 11 seconds of grainy exterior surveillance footage from the kennel's loading area. Timestamped the afternoon Atlas disappeared. Rachel, my sister-in-law, unmistakable even in the low-resolution footage, walking a golden retriever on an unfamiliar leash toward a man standing beside a panel van, handing over the leash, accepting a folded envelope in return. The whole exchange lasting less than a minute before she got back into her own car and drove away. We've identified the man receiving the dog as a known broker, Reyes said. He's cooperating now that he understands the scope of what we're building. He's confirmed the seller's identity and provided a copy of the transaction paperwork. She slid a photocopy across the table. A bill of sale, golden retriever male 4 years old, fully trained and certified. Sale price, $18,000. Signed at the bottom, in handwriting I recognized instantly, because I'd seen it on birthday cards and holiday notes for 6 years. Linda Carter. There's more, Reyes said. Bank records show a cash deposit of $14,000 into your mother-in-law's account 4 days after this sale. The broker typically takes a commission, which accounts for the difference. We also recovered text messages between your mother-in-law and sister-in-law, discussing the arrangement in the weeks leading up to it. She read a portion aloud, flat and procedural, the specific tone of someone who has learned to deliver ugly information without editorializing on it. Rachel, are you sure about this? It feels like a lot asterisk. Linda, she'll be upset for a while and then she'll get over it. She has Daniel. She doesn't need the dog, she needs this family to stop enabling her asterisk. Rachel and the money. Linda and the money. I sat in that small office and read those messages twice, and something in my chest that had been holding on, carefully, precariously for 3 days, finally let go. They hadn't just sold Atlas. They'd planned it, discussed it, reassured each other about it in writing, weeks in advance, using the language of an intervention rather than a theft, as though selling the medical equipment that kept me functioning was something they were doing to me for my own good. I want you to consider something difficult, Reyes said, once I'd had a few minutes to sit with the messages. We have enough right now to make an arrest, but if we move immediately, we get theft and fraud charges against 2 people who will likely claim confusion, miscommunication, a family dispute that got out of hand. If we wait, if you're willing to let your mother-in-law continue believing she got away with this, while we finish building the financial trail and confirm the broker's full network, we get a much stronger conspiracy case. One that's harder for a defense attorney to talk down to a misdemeanor. How long, I asked. A few weeks, maybe less. I thought about Linda at that moment, still telling neighbors we'd find him together. Still accepting casseroles. Still, as far as I knew, planning to keep playing the part of the grieving, devoted mother-in-law for as long as it served her. I can do a few weeks, I said. I didn't tell Daniel the full truth yet, not right away. A decision Reyes and I discussed carefully, given his conflict-avoidant history with his own mother, given the very real risk that even an unintentional slip from him could compromise everything the investigation still needed. I told him only that Atlas had been found safe, that police were handling some loose ends, and that I needed him to trust me and not ask more yet. It was the hardest kind of silence I'd ever kept, not because I doubted the decision, but because keeping it meant continuing to sit across from Linda at dinner, continuing to accept her hugs, continuing to let her narrate a grief she'd manufactured herself. I did it anyway. For 3 weeks, I became better at hiding what I knew than I'd ever been at hiding my PTSD. 10 days into that waiting period, Linda announced, at a Sunday dinner she'd organized specifically for the purpose, that she wanted to hold a community fundraiser. For search costs, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin, for a reward for whatever it takes. I just can't stand thinking he's still out there somewhere. I sat across the table and said thank you, and meant every word of it as performance. the way I imagined she'd meant every word of her own performance for the past 2 weeks. I told Reyes about the fundraiser the next morning, certain she'd want to shut it down immediately. Using a fabricated tragedy to solicit real donations felt like exactly the kind of thing that should stop a plan cold. Let her, Reyes said after a pause. It's one more piece of evidence. Solicitation of funds under false pretenses tied to a crime she's already committed. It strengthens the pattern. And it tells us something important. She believes she's completely safe. That's exactly the mindset we want her in when we move. The fundraiser was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon, a neighborhood gathering in the small park at the end of our street, the same park where, 2 weeks earlier, half the block had gathered with flashlights on the first night of the search. Linda at the center of it, directing volunteers with the calm competence of someone born to lead a crisis. Detective Reyes told me, 3 days before the fundraiser, that they'd be ready to move that same afternoon. "We'd like your permission to do it there," she said. "Publicly, I know that's a hard thing to ask, but the same neighbors who watched her perform this grief for 2 weeks deserve to watch the truth land in the same place." I thought about it for exactly one night. "Do it there," I said. The park was full by 2 o'clock that Saturday, folding tables with a donation jar. A poster board covered in photos of Atlas that Linda had personally selected and printed, neighbors in lawn chairs, someone's portable speaker playing music low enough to talk over. Linda stood near the donation table in a soft cardigan, accepting hugs, accepting sympathy, telling anyone who asked that she hadn't given up hope, that she believed in her heart we'd find him someday. Rachel stood near her, quieter than usual, though I noticed, watching her more closely than I ever had before that day. A kind of brittleness underneath her expression that I recognized now for what it probably was. The specific tension of someone waiting for something they weren't sure was actually coming. At 2:40, an unmarked car pulled up at the edge of the park, followed by a marked patrol vehicle. Detective Reyes got out first. Behind her, an officer opened the back door of the patrol car, and Atlas stepped out onto the grass in his blue service vest, calm, steady, exactly the dog he'd always been trained to be, and walked without hesitation directly toward me. The park went quiet in stages, the way a rumor moves through a crowd. First the people closest to the cars, then the tables, then Linda herself, turning to see what had gone silent behind her. I watched her face when she saw him. I watched the specific, involuntary flicker of something that wasn't relief. "Oh my God," she said, moving toward us, arms already extending for another performance of the same joy she'd been rehearsing for 2 weeks. "You found him, you actually found him." "Linda Carter," Detective Reyes said, and something in her voice stopped Linda mid-stride. "Yes. I need to speak with you and Rachel Carter regarding the sale of this service animal on the 14th. The silence that followed had a different texture than the one before it. I felt it settle over the park like weather. "Sale," Linda said, her voice climbed half an octave. What is she talking about? I don't know anything about a sale. We searched for 2 weeks. Ask anyone here, ask any of these people. We have surveillance footage of Rachel Carter transferring the dog to a known broker 4 hours after he went missing," Reyes said, evenly, loud enough to carry to the tables nearest us. Though not shouted, she didn't need to shout. "We have a bill of sale bearing your signature. We have bank records showing a cash deposit matching the sale price. And we have text messages between the two of you discussing the plan in advance." Rachel didn't say anything. She'd gone very pale, standing near the donation table, one hand resting on it like she needed the support. Linda's face did something I'll remember for the rest of my life, a fast, ugly scramble through several different expressions, looking for one that might still work. Confusion, outrage, finally something closer to panic aimed directly at her daughter. "Rachel set this up," she said. "This was Rachel's idea. I didn't know the extent of it, Mom," Rachel said very quietly. "Stop. You handled the money," Reyes said to Linda. "Your daughter handled the transfer. That's not confusion. That's a plan with 2 roles in it." The neighbors who 2 weeks earlier had praised Linda's compassion, who taped flyers to their own mailboxes and organized flashlight searches at her direction, stood in that park and watched 2 officers explain, in careful procedural language, exactly what had actually happened. Nobody said anything in Linda's defense. Rachel was arrested first, in the park, in front of everyone. Linda followed 4 days later, once the department had finished coordinating with the broker's cooperating testimony and closed the last gaps in the financial trail: theft of property, fraud, and, given the interstate transport element of the resale network, charges that ultimately involved federal investigators as well. Daniel learned the full truth that same week, and I watched something in him break in a way I don't think he'd let himself break in the whole 6 years I'd known him. He'd spent our entire marriage smoothing over his family's cruelty with soft words and redirected conversations, and now he sat at our kitchen table with his head in his hands, saying the same sentence over and over. I should have said something years ago, every single comment. I heard every single one of them and I never said anything. You didn't sell him, I said, but you're right that your silence made room for it. He didn't argue with that. I think by then he understood it was true. I didn't interfere with the prosecution. Several people asked me in the months that followed, a few relatives, one particularly persistent family friend, whether I planned to go easy on Linda, given everything, given family, given the holidays we'd once spent together. I told all of them the same thing, the truest sentence I had. I wasn't going to protect people who'd sold the medical equipment keeping me alive to pay off a family member's credit card debt, and then spent 2 weeks pretending to grieve alongside me while I fell apart looking for him. Rachel pleaded guilty to theft and fraud charges, receiving a sentence that included restitution and several years of probation, reduced somewhat by her cooperation once the case against Linda became overwhelming. Linda fought the charges longer, through a trial that dragged into the following spring. But the evidence, the footage, the bill of sale, the bank records, the text messages, the broker's testimony left very little room for anything but conviction. She received a longer sentence than Rachel, tied to her role in orchestrating the sale and notably to the fundraiser, which the court treated as a separate act of fraud layered on top of the theft. I filed for divorce 4 months after the park. Daniel didn't fight it. He told me near the end that he understood that he'd spent his whole life choosing peace over truth, and that by the time he finally chose truth, it was already too late to save what his silence had cost us. I think he was right about that too. A year after the trial, I started volunteering with the same organization that trained Atlas Meridian Service Partners, helping raise and socialize young dogs in the early stages of their service training, before they're paired with the veterans and first responders who need them most. Atlas comes with me most weekends. He's older now, a little grayer around the muzzle, still exactly as steady as he was the day I met him. He doesn't work as hard as he used to, not because he can't, but because I need him less than I did, a fact that still surprises me sometimes. In a good way, the way recovery surprises you when you've spent long enough not expecting it. The first night after the trial ended, I slept without fear, not because the nightmares were gone completely. Some habits of the mind take longer than a courtroom verdict to unlearn. But that night, when I woke with my heart already racing from a dream I couldn't fully remember, Atlas did exactly what he'd been trained to do years earlier, exactly what he'd done 1,000 nights before that one. He pressed his paw against my chest, deliberate and firm, until my breathing found its way back to something steady. The same gentle weight that had once reminded me I'd survived an attack now reminded me of something even larger. I was safe. Not because a courtroom had punished the people who'd hurt me, though I won't pretend that didn't matter. I was safe because I'd finally, completely, stopped calling them family. And because the dog who'd once given me back my life had, without ever meaning to, helped me get him back too.